Horned Frogs. Fall camp rolls along, but we are getting closer to that opening game against Colorado. We're really just 2 weeks away. Also, a lot of you had a reaction and questions and comments about TCU pausing that series with SMU and more from Thursday's video. We'll talk about that and more next here on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right. Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Subscribe to podcasts wherever it is you get them in its audio form, any platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. You can also subscribe to Locked On Horned Frogs on our YouTube channel. And we're creeping up on 800 subscribers, which is cool. We're at 760 right now. It has slowly grown here over the last calendar year. And so I appreciate that. Let's continue to keep that momentum going. On today's show, we'll have some fall camp notes. Team actually having like a closed practice today, so no media access on this Friday. And then they have an open practice tomorrow, and they're doing their Meet the Frogs event. So if you want to get out there tomorrow and meet Sonny Dykes and the team, then that will be the time to do it. And tomorrow we will be 2 weeks away from that opening game against Colorado. Coach Prime coming to town, big noon kickoff. Fox will be there. Exciting times for TCU football as they get ready to open another season coming off that incredible run last year. And so somebody sent me this yesterday. Somebody texted me and said, hey, is there a quarterback battle going on at TCU? And my immediate response was no, not to my knowledge. Apparently there was a short bit on SportsCenter on Thursday morning where they were talking about competition between Chandler Morris and Josh Hoover. And I found the clip on YouTube. And it's interesting. Like they sort of hedged. I mean, they said there was a quarterback battle, but they didn't. Like Greg McElroy was the analyst that they pitched to. So they set up the story, and the story was essentially like, hey, TCU coming back after a great run last season. Max Duggan is gone. How are they going to replace him? And they throw it to Greg McElroy. And McElroy basically says, like, we think it's going to be Chandler Morris. Conventional wisdom tells us it's going to be Chandler Morris, but Josh Hoover has also really impressed the coaching staff. But the way they framed it was that it was somehow a battle between Hoover and Morris, and I don't think that's actually the case. But here's where I'm at with this. So Chandler Morris is your starter. It hasn't been publicly announced. Like Sonny Dykes hasn't come out and said that he is quarterback one, mainly just because there hasn't been a true competition this go around. I mean, I think it's been his job to lose from the beginning. Last year, there was a real competition between Max Duggan and Chandler Morris. Chandler Morris won the job, and Coach Dykes was asked about it on an almost daily basis. Like, hey, is he, who's the guy who's pulling ahead? What do you want to see from these quarterbacks, et cetera? And, he finally named I don't even think, honestly, now I think about it, I'm not sure he named a starter before the season. I would have to go back and look at that. I know at one point he said all three guys could play against Colorado, which turned out to be true because Chandler got hurt and then Max came in and then Sam closed out the game and got a few plays in before it was over. But he sort of framed it that way. And maybe like the day of the game, it started to leak out that Chandler was going to be the guy. But anyway, that was legit competition at my point. And they haven't really publicly announced anything this time because I don't think there's actually a competition happening. Chandler Morris has gotten the reps with the first team pretty much exclusively. And he's been the guy from the get-go. He's been the guy during the offseason. I think that's going to benefit him. I mean, I just feel like the fact that he has sort of been the unquestioned leader at that position from the start of the offseason should be a good thing for him and the team because guys know this is who you're looking up to. He's had a chance to work with, his receivers, work with his players. And so that's all good. Here's what I'll say about Josh Hoover. And Tanner McKitty commented on yesterday's YouTube video and was basically like, I think people are selling Josh short. He looked pretty good during spring practice and has a pretty good arm. He's very good with accuracy and knows the system. I think he's perfect at this point. And yeah, I mean, like, it's hard to disagree with all that. I feel like everybody wants to have the ideal perfect situation at every position, right? So especially at quarterback, because it's such a, I mean, it's the position on the field that can derail your season in a hurry if you don't have someone that can play at a high level. But yes, you make good points. He's done a nice job this offseason. He's played in a similar system in high school. He should have a good feel and good understanding for how to run this offense. We just don't know a lot about him and what's going to happen if and when he had to play in a game, because we haven't seen him in a game situation at the college level. But everybody wants, the ideal situation, and you'd love to have an experienced backup behind Chandler Morris. I think the good news about this is, the reason national people are talking about a quarterback competition is because they're not locked in and following TCU on a daily basis like we are. And now should they maybe be paying more attention to the team that went to the national championship game last year? Probably. But I'm not going to turn this into an argument about how TCU is covered and how much coverage they get across the country. Point being, they're not at practice all the time. They're not, following all these updates. They're not listening to, coaches and players speak on a daily basis. And so my guess is ESPN's college football's analysts, ESPN's college football team, they probably got in touch with Sonny Dykes, got in touch with, some of the offensive coaching staff, had a conversation with them. They're like, hey, we're getting ready to preview the season. We're getting ready to talk about you guys this year. We want to know what's going on. And Sonny Dykes and the coaching staff probably had high praise for the growth and the development that Josh Hoover has made this offseason, which is good news, because that tells you that the coaching staff seems to trust him, that, they like what he has brought to the table, and they feel like he could get it done if he had to. Now, at the same time, did they spend a large part of the offseason searching for another quarterback option? Yes, they did, but it didn't work out. I mean, they got a guy, but then he left shortly after fall camp started. So now this is your depth chart. But no, I don't think there is an actual quarterback competition going on. Chandler Morris is the guy. He's been the guy. But maybe that's good news for TC moving forward, that this coaching staff feels good enough about Josh Hoover that they are talking him up to people that ask, and they're saying, hey, we like this kid. We like what he can do. We like what he brings to the table. And it's really just a factor of, Chandler staying healthy, and we feel good about what we have behind him, though, on the depth chart. So that was just kind of an interesting thing that came down about TCU yesterday. Some other news: John Lands, who played a lot of guard last year, he and Wes Harris would sort of switch in and out, and he played a lot of snaps for the Frogs. He was back at practice. He's been out really all of fall camp, and they've said it was just sort of a minor nagging injury, but still he's missed a few weeks of practice now at this point. He was back at practice on Thursday, and so we'll see kind of where he is, from a physical standpoint. I think he's been around so much that he's not necessarily somebody that needs a ton of reps to get into a good place mentally and physically to be ready to play. However, it seems like they really like this combination with Coleman inside, Coker at tackle, Colton Deary, Willis Patrick, and then Michael Nichols at that other tackle. And seems like that might be the ideal five that A.J. Ricker and Coach Dykes and company want to roll with, at least to start the season. But good news that Lance is healthy, because I think regardless, he's going to rotate in and out rather frequently. But especially if somebody gets hurt, A.J. Ricker said this the other day. It's like, you want to get your best five, and then you really want to get to a place where you know who your best 10 are. And part of the reason they kind of slide guys inside and move them around and cross-train is because with offensive line play, it really is next man up. And it's not necessarily like, okay, this is my second team left guard. It's like, okay, my right guard went down. Who's my best backup lineman? and can he play multiple positions? And Lance is a guy that, in theory, could play all 3 positions on the interior, because I know he had some time playing the center position in spring camp. And so I think he's just, we talk about like swing tackles, like backup linemen that can play either the right or left tackle position. Maybe Lance can be a guy that sort of swings around the interior of the offensive line if he has to, whether that's giving somebody a breather or playing if someone's hurt, or he could work his way in the starting lineup for all we know. I mean, now that he's healthy, it's just a matter of can they get him the reps and how much he does with the opportunities he gets in practice as we barrel towards the season. When we come back, I want to discuss some of the reaction from Thursday's show. We talked a lot about TCU and SMU, TCU pausing that series with SMU, and so we'll get to some of your reaction on that and more right here on Locked On Horned Frogs. So if you've listened to the show for a while, one thing you know about me is that I'm not the best with vehicles. It's like vehicle maintenance, knowing what's wrong. It can be tough for me to understand exactly what's going on. And, it can be an overwhelming thing. Like, okay, what part do I need to get for my car? What really needs to be fixed? Am I going to get charged an arm and a leg? For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. And it's the same thing when it comes to your vehicle. And one of our great sponsors, eBay Motors, can make sure you get every part that needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Right parts, right fit, right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Again, that's ebaymotors.com. Use that guaranteed fit program. One note, guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply. So we discussed the news on Thursday that TCU is pausing their series with SMU, and that'll start in the 2025 season. So we still got 3 more games, for the record, between TCU and SMU on an annual basis. After that, it will transition to, I said the series was ending on Twitter. That was a little premature. It's not necessarily ending. I think TCU and SMU will play occasionally. They're just not going to play every season. And for TCU, they're not going to play every other season in Dallas. I think that was a big sticking point here, was the fact that they had to go back and forth every other year to Dallas to play at Jerry Ford Stadium. Jamie Plunkett reached out to Jeremiah Donati, and he had this statement on the situation. He said, "We have tremendous respect for SMU and the battle for the Iron Skillet, which dates back over 100 years. Playing more home games has been a priority for us and our fans, and is more importantly in the best interest of the TCU football program. We look forward to annually having 7 home games and as many as 8 in certain years. As our future non-conference schedules will evolve, we keep open the possibility of future games with the Mustangs." So this is more about, wanting a consistent number of home games, possibly having more games at home, which leads me to believe, I would love to be wrong about this. I think they will, maybe in the next 7 or 8 years, schedule 1 or 2 marquee non-conference games. Hopefully those will be at home. Hopefully they're not neutral site games, against Power 5 teams. But I think the majority of the games they're going to place the SMU series with are going to be group of 5 teams at home. So I don't know who that'll end up being. Maybe it's North Texas. Maybe it's Rice. I'm just thinking regionally teams that are close and that can make the trip to the Carter and play TCU. I know they played Louisiana Tech during the COVID year, and Sonny Cumbie's there now. And so I would think they have a pretty good relationship with the Bulldogs administration, with the people that are making decisions there. But I get the impression that this is not going to be maybe you'll have a few of those huge games that we all love, non-conference games that we love, that unfortunately haven't happened much at Amon G. Carter. We had LSU and Ohio State, but those games were at Jerry World. But it feels like, at least on the surface, they're going to, revamp this with a lot of group of 5 opponents. That's just my guess based on what Donati said. But, he makes it pretty clear here. It was about the fact that they were having to go to Dallas every other season, and they wanted more home games on the schedule. And so they're going to do that by pausing the series in 2025. Blake Murphy says, I like the move of pausing the SMU series. This is in the YouTube comments. Just wish they would have announced after this year's game. SMU will be extra motivated this season. Yeah, there's actually, as I said, there's actually 3 more games on the docket. So news leaked out, and my assumption is that SMU leaked this news out because they knew this was going to happen, and they were trying to make TCU look bad. But you're totally right. I mean, there's going to be some extra juice in these games the next few seasons. Thankfully, the game this year is at home, but it's a game that SMU always gets fired up for, and that's not going to change in the next few seasons. Mason Stevens says if SMU gets into a power conference, then bring it back. If they're stuck in the G5, then play them every 4 to 5 years. Yeah, I mean, that's a huge sticking point here, too. I do wonder if the Pac-12 had stayed together and SMU got in the Pac-12, if TCU would have a different feeling about this. But it seems like it's more about the facilities that SMU has and just the fact that they have to make that trip frequently. And so maybe it wouldn't have made a huge difference, but I totally see your point, Mason. And yeah, it's a good one. Like if SMU was a Power 5 team and it was helpful in, the season resume, I think TCU would be much more open to doing that. Vincent Pryor says, I like the series. I like the tradition. There should be a caveat when SMU returns to prominence to return to the series. And I think, honestly, if SMU got to a place where they were really good, it would be a game that TCU would be more open to playing. I'm not sure if it would happen every year, but, we still see like Georgia and Georgia Tech play each other every season. Clemson and South Carolina play each other every season. There's some good like interconference rivalries, in-state rivalries throughout college football. This is just one that we're going to lose on an annual basis here soon. Tommy Fisher said it's smart for TCU not to play this game, especially when it's a home and home. We get no credit if we beat them, and they're good enough to beat us from time to time. With the loss of UT and OU, we need another open date to schedule a big-name opponent because at the end of the year, a win or a loss against someone like Auburn means a lot more than a win or a loss against SMU. Yeah, I mean, and Tommy went on to say the possibility of a 10-game conference schedule is a factor here too, and I agree with that because the Big 12 is adding so many teams. They might pivot to that here soon. One thing I'll say about the resume part of this, I get everybody's point, and like maybe people are approaching this from the perspective of like continuing to build TCU's brand, which I think that's important. But from a playoff standpoint, like, here in a few years, the playoffs there'll be automatic bids for teams that win the conference. And so I think there's a path to making the playoff, even if you have an early season loss to SMU. And the bottom line is like I get it. SMU's better. They have more talent. They might continue to get talent. I know they're really trying hard with NIL, but TCU's lost this game twice, I guess 3 times in the past decade. And in 2019 and 2021, like those were 2 of TCU's worst teams in a long time. Like if TCU loses the game to SMU, they're not like, as of right now, that means they're not a contender. Like if they go out this season and lose to SMU, that gives me a pretty good indication that this team is not ready for prime time. And I know like upsets happen and there can be one-off situations. I totally understand that. But usually I think that SMU game is actually a really good measuring stick because it tells you it might be a game for a half, it might be a game for a quarter, but the talent should eventually win out, right? And like the seasons they've lost to SMU, things have gone downhill in a hurry. And I think it's because those teams just weren't very good. Brian Caper said people he wants people to spread the word about Locked On Horned Frogs and try to get to 1,000 subscribers before the first game. I would love that, Brian. Yeah, it's, spread the word to whoever, and I would love to get to 1,000 subscribers before that series opener or that season opener against Colorado. That's a great goal to have, and I hope it gets done. Jesus said he thinks Chandler Morris is going to play all 15 games. Man, I would love that. I would love if TCU plays 15 games, and if Chandler plays all of them, and that would be fantastic. Charles says he's never cared about the TCU-SMU rivalry. TCU doesn't owe SMU. TCU playing SMU isn't going to raise up SMU. TCU fought like crazy to get where they are. SMU didn't do anything to help TCU. Who cares? Yeah, I mean, I think that's the perspective of a lot of TCU fans, is that they were essentially doing SMU a favor by playing this game, and that it was time to end it and put a stop to it. And I get that. But, I think I understand why TCU stopped the game. I am sort of disappointed it's ending, but again, I get from TCU's perspective why they are stopping the series and moving on from it after the 2025 season. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about Colorado, and we'll wrap things up. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. As of tomorrow, we will be 2 weeks away from game day. When I start the show, not this Monday, but next Monday, we will be in a game week. By the way, Meet the Frogs will be at the indoor from 12 to 2 on Saturday. If you want to go by there and check it out. I mentioned it, but I didn't mention the time. Somebody asked me, I think it was Brian, asked me on YouTube. He was like, hey, have you seen any film of Colorado? What do you think they bring to the table? Colorado's going to be a interesting game. I think it's a game that TCU should win and be able to handle their business. One thing I know that's a challenge, and Sonny Dykes talked about this at media days, they have so many transfers. Like Coach Prime completely overhauled this roster. And so one thing that's going to be difficult for TCU will simply be getting film on these guys, right? Like finding tape to say, okay, what does this player do well? Now they can attack some of the scheme things. They know Sean Lewis is the offensive coordinator from Colorado. And if you don't know that story, he was the head coach at Kent State for a number of years, came over to Colorado with Dion this season, and is a really well-regarded and good offensive coordinator. And so it's going to be a challenge to stop his offense. He runs a hurry-up style. They're going to throw the ball around a lot, kind of that air raid tree, an extension of that. Shadur Sanders, Deion's son, the Jackson State quarterback the last few seasons, he will be playing quarterback for Colorado. Travis Hunter, former #1 player in the nation coming out of high school, shockingly flipped from Florida State to Colorado on signing day a few years ago and played both ways at Jackson State. Don't know I know they're going to try to play him both ways here at Colorado, but I'm not sure how many snaps he's going to get on the offensive side of the ball. But that's another name to know. One thing I've noticed about Colorado, they've been doing like a YouTube kind of behind the scenes series throughout their off season. And they just look really small. I mean, like that, it doesn't always tell the full story, and you're not watching the entire roster, but they don't look like a big team. And last season in that game, TCU struggled in the first half a lot on offense. And honestly, in the second half, they started to get going. But it was mainly, if you remember, a lot of it was just the fact that they figured out early in the second half, we can run the ball on these guys. And it sort of took me back to some games late in the Gary Patterson era against like Texas Tech and Kansas, where TCU was just more physical and they figured out like, oh, we can just run the ball and get what we want on the ground. And so we're just going to do that and control the clock. And TCU kind of went to that style against the Buffaloes, where they just ran the ball. They were physical up front and did what they wanted on the ground and ended up winning the football game. And so, I think it'll be a different game this year, obviously. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a steady diet of Amani Bailey and Trey Sanders in that football game. One, just to get Chandler Morris more comfortable, but two, because it seems like they don't have the size to really stack up with TCU. I think that's where the separation is going to be. They have some talented, skilled players. I don't know if they have the depth they need, but up front, it's just, even if you bring in a number of transfers, it's really difficult along the offensive and defensive lines to overhaul things in one season. But I would expect a lot of energy from Colorado. I think they're probably going to plot all the stops and, do their best to try to confuse TCU, to try to put them on their heels. And I hope it's a game where the defense can really set the tone. This defense has gotten a lot of praise this offseason. They're returning a bunch of pieces from last year's team. Can they go out there and be physical, get the job done, and find a way to really punish this Colorado offense and not allow them to get into a rhythm? And that would then, in turn allow TCU to kind of do what they want on offense, stay on schedule, and slowly acclimate to what is going to be a new season. But it should be a great atmosphere. Should be, great opportunity for TCU to show what this team has. And I think there's going to be so much hype around this game. I really don't worry about them coming out flat. Honestly, my bigger concern would be them coming out too amped, because I think between all the hype around the game and just the fact that they want to get out there and put on a good showing, given what happened last time they took the field against Georgia, it should be a fun start to the season for TCU. That'll do it for today and for the week for Locked On Horned Frogs. We'll be back on Monday. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.